Hi, my name's Mandy Walker. I'm a cinematographer and I was the director of photography on Mulan, and you're watching the Go Creative Show.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Consoli. I'm a director and owner of BC Media Productions. This is the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. So today we're talking with Mandy Walker, ASC ACS. She's the director of photography for Disney's Mulan. And if you guys have not seen the film yet, I strongly suggest you do. It's really, really good and not your typical Disney live action adaptation. We've seen Lion King. We covered that on the show. Aladdin, we covered that on the show too. And each one of them has kind of their own feel and vibe. Mulan is the same. In fact, Mulan's probably the most like traditional film in that it isn't a musical. And we talk a lot about the decisions, why they didn't, make this a musical, and how she treated the film from a cinematic standpoint to reflect kind of this different standalone film kind of thinking. They didn't necessarily want it to be, just a remake of the cartoon. They wanted it to be its own standalone film, and they did a really good job of doing it. So we talk, of course, a lot about that. We talk about gender roles in cinema. How you film a more masculine role, how you film a more feminine role, because that's a big theme in Mulan. And of course, the battle scenes in Mulan are just so great and meticulously shot. And Mandy tells us a lot about how she achieved that in both lighting and cinematography. So there's a lot of stuff in there, and two special lenses that she used that I've never heard of. And it's kind of interesting how she uses these. So there's a lot of interesting things in there. And of course, Mandy has excellent work outside of Mulan, and talk a little bit about that. So let's dive right in, because there's so much to get to with Mandy Walker, ASC ACS, the director of photography for Disney's Mulan. So I'm here with Mandy Walker, ASC ACS, and director of photography for Disney's Mulan. Mandy, thank you so much for being on Go Creative Show.
My pleasure.
You must be so excited. Mulan is finally coming out. What does it feel like?
Look, I'm just really excited because I know especially the fans and just people in general have been waiting for this movie since March, when we were originally going to release, and then it's missed its new dates because of COVID. So I'm just really excited. And so many people that I know too have been desperate to see it. So I can't wait.
Well, I got a chance to see it today. Thankfully, your team and the team at Disney gave us a screener, and it's so good. The cinematography is absolutely gorgeous. And we've had the DPs on for Aladdin and The Lion King and all these new live action remakes, and they all have something different about them. And I think the approach that you took to Mulan is really fresh and engaging and a really smart choice. And what I mean by that is the fact that it's not a musical, and you filmed it in a way that it has almost a more adult sort of vibe to it, if that makes any sense. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, we were taking a different approach. We of course recognize the animation and how successful it was, and people were waiting for the live action version, but it is a little different version, and it's I think it's for a wider audience and people of more varied age, because still young children are going to love it, but also adults and teenagers.
Yeah, I felt that way too, and I think it's not just the typical, Disney live action refresh that people have seen over the past couple of years. It really kind of stands on its own. When I'm watching it, I didn't feel like I was watching a recreation of a previous movie. It felt like its own film. And I thought that was just a really good choice. And I want to kind of hear from you how this began. When this film came to you and you were approached, or however it happened, was it always planned to have it be so different from the musical?
Yeah, it was. So the first time I heard about the film was I got sent the script by my agent, and he also knew that I was a big fan of Nikki Caro and always wanted to work with her. So when I read the script, I saw that immediately, and I loved what they'd done with it, the writing. And also I started to research myself and realise that Mulan is a story that's thousands of years old. It's comes from a poem, the Ballad of Mulan in Chinese culture. It's a story that they all know, and it's been told many times different ways. So this was our way of telling that story, and Nikki's vision of it. Then it became, obvious to me that we didn't have to do, follow the animation exactly. It was a new iteration.
So, and the Nikki Caro we're talking about is the director, just to bring people up to speed. So was there a little part of you that was kind of like disappointed almost that there wasn't musical numbers in here? I think that would be so fun to shoot, is like a big musical would be kind of a fun treat for a cinematographer. And were you a little bit sort of like, surprised and maybe slightly let down when you first heard before you really dug your heels into the project?
No, I wasn't. I tell you what I got excited about is because when I read it and I realized we were doing a film with martial arts and battle sequences, that was exciting to me. So that was the thing I sort of also, it's a great story about a woman, and it has good messages. So to me, that's how I looked at it, and I didn't think it's not going to be musical, because when I read it, I felt like it stood on its own as a different type of movie.
You can really see that in the trailer too. Like when that trailer came out, it really excited a lot of people. You knew right away it wasn't going to have the songs in it, and it was just going to be a standalone piece. So I loved it. Like I said at the beginning, I thought it was a really good choice and kind of a different way to approach it. I want to talk to you about the kind of famously criticized animation for Mulan. When it first came out, Disney was criticized for cultural appropriation, and it kind of got a lot of flack at its original release. Were there concerns this time around that you weren't going to have the same pitfalls?
I think that, when I came onto the project, there was never any question that we weren't going to have a full Chinese cast, and that the Northern Invaders would be Mongolian or Kazakhstan, people that we'd found, a lot of the horse riders. So by the time it was absolutely no question that wasn't going to be the case.
Talk to me about the inspiration for the look of the film.
Mm-hmm. Well, we started, when I work with a director, I always start from script and story. So we go through a few times the script, and Nikki would explain to me how she feels the character is, experiencing things, or the emotional journey for them, and what she feels important for what the audience is feeling at a certain time in the script. So I take a lot of notes, and we talk about each scene and the experience that she feels needs to be expressed visually. And then we looked at, obviously we looked at the animation first, and then we looked at a lot of Chinese cinema and martial arts films, films that from filmmakers such as Zhang Yimou and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, The Last Emperor, and sort of gleaned what we could from that, because a lot of them had a lot of battle sequences and martial arts sequences that were done in a contemporary way. And but then we also looked at Chinese art and architecture, and we went to China, I think 4 times altogether. I took a lot of photographs in the Imperial City that we used as our backdrop for the Imperial City in the film. And we ended up not shooting a lot there, not with our actors. We shot in New Zealand. So then we have to look at how we're going to find the same locations in New Zealand, especially the landscape that was familiar. And we managed to do that, which was great. And we spent a lot of time scouting and finding places that were similar to places we'd found in China already that we thought were appropriate. And then a lot of the sets we built on a backlot in New Zealand. So we tried to be very diligent in making most of what we could in camera. So, of course, we have CGI, but Nikki feels like she always wanted the actors to feel grounded where they were, and to also, make sure that we didn't have to spend a lot of money on CGI, but also just that feeling is there that we're in the real places. And so we did shoot some second unit and scenic unit in China for, our big wide shots of the Imperial City and wide shots of some of the landscape. And then we'd come back to New Zealand and find particular places that would suit. And the other thing that, one of the really important things that she'd said to me at the beginning of the film was that Mulan is the centre of this story, and that we always want to feel that the audience is with her on her journey. So I took that in to my mind about how we approach that photographically. And one of the things that I really noticed about the architecture, and also the way that a lot of the other films had been shot, was they're very symmetrical in the Chinese art as well. And a lot of the architecture is set up that way. So it really lent itself to putting her in the middle. And it was also, a challenge for me is how we shoot the battle sequences with lots of people, horses, action going around, but the audience wants to be with her. So I started looking at different types of lenses that we could use one, we had this old lens from the 1800s called a Petzval. And what it does is it focuses your eye to the centre of the frame. And then the rest of it sort of drops off in a very elegant way, not just an out of focus way, very elegant way. And so we used that for her shots a lot of the time. And we also had what we called a Chi lens, which was based on a Gauss lens where the edges drop off, but in a chromatic aberration with colour and a little bit of a spiral effect that enhanced her elite power, that she was special, and that she could, once she realised that she had this chi and she had this special abilities, it was about sort of the awakening of that, and for her.
What was the name of that lens?
A Gauss, Gauss.
Gauss lens. And then what was the first one? You mentioned two different lenses you were playing with.
The first one was called a Petzval, Petzal, or Zal.
I have not heard of either of these, but I know exactly the shots you're talking about because it did have those aberrations around the sides. And at first when I was watching that, I thought it was a post trick. I didn't think it was something in lens. So it's cool to see that was in lens. I love that.
I think, again, we really set out to do as much as we could in camera, because you get that kind of, I still think you get that organic feel. We didn't want it to look like, especially didn't want it to look like a superhero movie. I mean, she doesn't have superpower attributes like, sparks coming out of her hands. There was none of that. So it's sort of, as much as we could ground it in reality in sort of a little bit more of an old-fashioned sense of cinema, to have it as much as we could in camera.
Yeah, and I think there's something to those types of battles where they're not supernatural. So how do you toe the line? I mean, what are some of the things? Let's talk about the battle scenes, because I wanted to anyway. Particularly the one that sort of culminates in this big avalanche right around the midway point of the film.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to hear kind of the way you approached that scene. What were some of the challenges you faced, and how you did sort of create that grounded look? Because for all intents and purposes, what she's doing is pretty supernatural. I mean, it's pretty wild what she's able to do, but it always felt real. Tell me about that.
I'm glad you say that because it means that we've achieved what we set out to achieve.
Yeah.
Well, again, it was one of the, when I was reading the scripts and reading that sequence, I was getting really excited because I had never done anything like that before, and I love these sequences in other movies. So I was excited. Nikki is very organised and methodical, and so am I, so that we were sort of on the same page in that sense. And we spent time doing a pre-visualization of some of the more difficult and logistical parts of that sequence, where starts off with the armies facing off, then there's a battle, and it ends in the avalanche, and as you're saying. And so we did a pre-visualization of the beats, and then some of the stunts that she had to do, we had to divide up into how we were going to shoot it to get it to the screen. So, for instance, there's once she's coming off a horse, we had to shoot her separately, the horse separately, and the background separately. So things like that have to be planned and have to be very meticulous to make work. And so there are a few shots in the film that are like that we had to shoot in a specific way to make them seamlessly fit together. And the other thing was, for instance, with the avalanche, we had, as much as we could, the same thing I was saying before, is the actors were reacting with snow, so all the tighter shots of the guys in the snow, and Mulan in the snow, we had real snow, well, fake snow, but we had in-camera snow around them and wind, and then it was enhanced by visual effects in the background. But the other thing that we did on this movie, which I'd never been a part of before, is we had a military unit that trained the extras and the actors in all their martial arts, in the sword fighting, the horse riding, and all the military maneuvers, and how the army would perform, and how they'd line up, and how they'd fire their arrows together. And they spent months doing that. And Nikki and I would go and watch, every few days sometimes, and especially at the end, and walk around with lenses. But and line up shots. But one of the things that we really wanted to do was to not make it, once the fight started, to not make it like a melee of fighting and people just crashing into each other, and not really feeling what centering on Mulan again. So we tried to, and also we didn't want it to be super violent. I mean, it's a Disney movie, and we didn't want blood and guts either. So we looked at doing it in more of an elegant way, and the way she moves is quite elegant and controlled. It's not just a smashing into people or, doing a maneuver that ends up flying all over the place. She's very controlled and very elegant. So we wanted the camera to be that way too. So a lot of our shots were meticulously planned around how the stunts were going, or the stunts would be adjusted to how we wanted to move the camera, and to be able to travel with her, to keep her in the centre of the movie, and have it, more, how do I say it? It's very stylized in a sense that it's sort of keeping the feeling and the sort of visual language of the rest of the movie, instead of just getting to battle and all of a sudden we just bang crash into each other, and so that, to me, it was a big job, but I feel like I'm so happy with how we did it and how it looks, and I feel that it works storytelling wise for her journey.
Absolutely. In fact, watching it, I was thinking about how it felt like a dance piece. Like it was almost like you guys treated it as if you were doing a music video or something, and you were following dancers.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's a really good way of putting it. And I think, sometimes I remember Nikki just saying, I don't want guys, falling on the ground doing ugly faces to camera, that sort of thing. I don't want someone crashing up to the lens, and it's more, like you said, it's exactly like that, more like a dance piece. It's sort of, again, we didn't want it to not look real, but in a sense, it was just very meticulously choreographed.
That's what I thought. What was so unique about it is because it had such precision to the battles, but it was realistic. I mean, it had a very realistic feel to it. It didn't feel like a kid's movie ever. And something stuck out to me as I was watching it, is I felt like there's a scene near the beginning where Mulan is being trained to like pour tea or something like that. I can't remember the exact details. In the words, you think, a better prepared host would have actually had this line ready to go, but our audience knows who I am. But there's some lines of dialogue there that explain the ways that a woman should act as they're pouring the tea. And as I'm listening to it, I'm thinking to myself, like, this is, they're almost like explaining how the cinematography has to be in a way, because she is following those rules, but doing it in her own way throughout the entire piece and her entire growth. And I can't remember the words, and I wish that I did. Maybe you do. But I was curious if you were taking cues from that scene as a way to direct your cinematography.
I think, yes, definitely. And that I took from the essence of that scene. But the thing about Mulan is she was never going to be that kind of girl. She had a passion inside her chi and a bravery that was there that she didn't discover until she got into battle, and she got into battle because of her devotion to her family. So the thing for me, I kept thinking always, was what she discovers, or we discover about her, that's important, is she's loyal, brave, and true. So she ends up being true to herself. So that wasn't her. She's not the woman to get dressed up like that and to be all poised and delicate. She's a warrior. And that's what she needs to find inside herself. And she ends up being one of the elite warriors. And she doesn't realize herself until she gets to understand and see what she can do, especially compared to other people. And her father always knew she had it inside her. But in their culture, women didn't behave like that. And that's why she has to get dressed up as a boy to go in the army and then suddenly gets to realize how special she is, and then to use that and to be true to herself. And so, yeah, that's exactly what you're saying.
I want to talk about the gender roles and the portrayal of genders in the film, because it's a big part of the story and really timely for, what's been going on over the past couple of years. Something I wanted to discuss with you is, how do you approach Mulan acting as a man and then Mulan then revealing that she's a woman? Were there different techniques in the lighting or the cinematography to support the storylines in how they're kind of different?
Well, it was very important that when she was dressed up as a boy, that the audience and believed that, because then you understand how she could be in the army for that long and nobody realised she was a girl. So it was all about, for me, making her blend in with everybody else and to not stand out. And then the moment that she realises that she's going to reveal herself and she's going to come back and fight as herself, she strips her armour and her hair comes out. And so that was one of the other important things, is that, because I know in the animation she cuts her hair off to go into the army, but our Mulan kept her long hair and tied it up. So when she lets that beautiful hair out, and then we shot this slow motion of her ripping her armour off, taking her hair out, and you're seeing all her beauty as a woman. So for me, that was a very important, special moment, and how to capture that emotionally. And so that's what we did. It was and you see her then right up to camera, and her face comes right up to the lens, and you go, wow, here she goes, and she's coming back to battle, and she's herself, and as herself. And so they were the cues that I took, and that's what we, how we worked out that sequence would be. And I think it's quite powerful, actually, that moment.
Absolutely. Can you talk to me about some of the choices in the cinematography and also the lighting to reflect the two different sides of her, the part where she's pretending to be a man and when she ultimately reveals who she is?
I think, the lensing was one thing. As we were saying, we were using her special portrait lens, and also one thing I did with the lighting for that moment is she's coming out of the geothermal area where she's had the fight with the witch, and she when she decides she's going to come back to battle and she's going to, show everybody who she is, and she's going to make an effort to save the emperor, is she rides through a tunnel in darkness, and then at the very moment that she reveals herself, she comes into the light. So she's riding through a dark tunnel, and then that moment she pulls her hair out, the light comes up. So we actually did that in camera, that it gets brighter and you see her. So you see her in the light for real. Mm. And the other thing was, like I was saying, when she also comes back to battle for that moment, one lucky thing amazing thing for us is that Yifei did most of her stunts and her sword work and her riding. And
wow.
So we could always focus the camera on her face. So I would set up 5 cameras when she's doing those amazing sword fighting and stunts that we could have really long lenses right here. And then I'd do that and try and separate her from the background in that moment, because it was all about her. She was coming back into battle. The fighting was focused on her. She was just, boom, boom, getting rid of guys left, right, and centre. And I dropped off the depth of field on all our cameras so that they were really low focus depth of field, so everyone was concentrating on her. Again, putting her in the frame. It was also about what she wore, that red outfit stood out between the other opposing army, and that she was shining.
Absolutely. And individuality in combat is kind of frowned upon to begin with. So you had a great canvas from which you could have a pop of color and an individual really highlighted. And there was also another cinematography technique that I found really interesting. I don't know what to call it, so I hope I can explain it in a way where you're like, oh yeah. But there are scenes where maybe she's like spinning around or doing a flip or something, and the camera's like locked onto her body. And so no matter like where she moves, she's centered in the frame. I don't know what that technique is called. It's almost kind of like a more advanced version of a snorri cam. You know what I mean? When like you have the camera mounted to your chest and it's looking right at you and it's always on you regardless of how you move. I don't know what the name of this technique is, so hopefully you can educate me on that. But also I'd love to know sort of how you came to that decision and how you actually executed it.
Well, I think, like I was saying in the beginning, we wanted the audience to feel like they were with her the whole time. So whatever was happening to her, we were centered on her. So that was mainly about the choreography. And I didn't that's a body cam you're talking about? Yeah. We didn't do anything like that. We had an amazing Scorpio Techna crane, which was 45 foot long, and great people driving it. And I had a head called an Oculus, which could spin around in basically in 4 axes. So again, a lot of those shots were choreographed, and we would choreograph them. We'd go in days earlier to work it out, and so we were able to, just by great camera operating and crane operating, we could lock onto her. So the camera was not attached. We were moving with her. And my guys and the people that were on that equipment, we rehearsed it. And that's why I think a lot of people love working on this movie, because we were doing special things like that. And it was really pushing their abilities to the max, and that they all sort of came to the party and were really excited about it. But we would give them challenges like that and rehearse them we'd rehearse them with a double and then with Yifei. But we designed those shots, and we designed them quite meticulously to go with the action, And for instance, there's a shot where Bori Khan comes in at the beginning of the movie, the first time he hits the garrison, and it's the introduction to him. And he's riding his horse with the shadow warriors. And then when he jumps up onto the garrison wall, they run up the wall. I don't know if it's in the trailer as well. And so what we wanted to show was, okay, here he comes, and then the world turns like these guys are doing something pretty amazing. And so the camera for the first time does this move where it locks onto him and it jumps up the wall with him and turns with him. And that was to create that feeling of a moment of change where you suddenly start to think, oh, wow. And it was the same with Mulan. Like there was just moments where we went, this is a moment where we're with her and the camera is doing the same move as her. So the audience are traveling with her.
I cannot believe that was operated. It's so perfect.
I had great people, can I say? My New Zealand crew and a few Australians. Yeah, they were great. And a couple of Americans, actually.
Every once in a while, American can give you something good too, I guess. We got a question from Fabricio Diaz. We talked a little bit about this, but maybe you can elaborate just a touch more. What's the prep you need to do to film a huge fight scene?
Well, I had like about almost 5 months prep on this movie. And we started prepping those scenes pretty much after we'd worked out what our visual language was and our approach. So months, basically. It took months, and it took us, we worked, in previs and with storyboards for those sequences very early on, but the actual execution of them was spent weeks with the stunt team working them out and Nikki and I coming in and watching. So it's months. It's nothing quick.
Let's talk about some gear, some equipment. What did you shoot on? I know you mentioned a couple of lenses, which were more specialty lenses, but what camera package were you shooting on? Then also, what were kind of your go-to lens set?
We shot on Alexa 65 mil, and I also had. Every time I do a movie, I go into Panavision really early. And I talked to this guy, Dan Sasaki, who's like a lens guru at Panavision, and he makes the lenses or adjusts them, or he finds old lenses in people's basements and lenses that he's found sort of in some stills photographer in Europe or something, and he gets the glass and he can make things up. But he's a technician, but he also understands, he's an artist. So I go into him really early once I've worked out with the director what we want the visual language to be and how I see the movie. And I can talk to him about or show him a painting or just say, because I felt like the landscapes in this movie should be epic, and harking back to things like Lawrence of Arabia. And they shot on 70 mil, which is one of the reasons why we looked at it, because 65 mil is it shows you epic landscape, and it also is very intimate. So when you're right close to somebody in a portrait, the background can drop off in a really nice, elegant way. And it's something they did really well in Lawrence of Arabia, if you remember those big epic exteriors and then the very intimate interiors and the very intimacy with somebody's face. And I find that format works really well. And so our main set of lenses were based on what are called Sphero 65s, and they are the type of lenses that Lawrence of Arabia used. And they've been reinvented and adjusted, and they're not they're not super clinical digital lenses, because I never like the image to be like that, to be super sharp, or super contrasty or anything like that. And they have an elegance to them. They have a creaminess to them, is what I call, and the skin tones are true. And they don't they don't look out of focus, but they don't look clinically digital, if you know what I mean, because they're old glass. So he spends months making the lenses for me, and I'll go in and say, this is right for this, and can you make this a little bit, can you soften the edges on this one more? And he can adjust it. But I like working with him because he's not purely a technician, and I don't know what he does or how he does things. He doesn't tell me, but I can explain stuff to him in an aesthetic sense, and he can create that for an audience. And I think he's brilliant in that and knows how to draw people's eyes to a certain part of the frame, or he can change the contrast or increase it, or, so he's quite brilliant, and I'm lucky to be working with him.
Are you getting a theatrical release for Mulan anywhere? I know in the States it's going to be on Disney Plus.
Yeah. In some countries that don't have Disney Plus, yes, it is. And I'm not sure exactly of the rollout at all, but I do know that some countries that, will be theatrical.
Where would you have done anything different knowing that there wasn't going to be a large-scale theatrical release, and at least in the States it's going to be solely Disney Plus for now? Just a streaming service?
No, because I think the film, no, I don't think so. And, a lot of people have huge TVs now. I mean, most people do, especially in the States, I know. So they're set up for more of a cinematic experience in their lounge rooms, not watching. I mean, and all films are eventually going to end up on the small screen. I think you have to not change that and just keep thinking that our vision is made for the right decisions for the movie and not for what people are watching it on particularly.
Let's talk about your lighting philosophy for Mulan. What was how did you approach lighting for this? Because you're working with so much. I mean, you've got moonlight scenes, you have fire, you've got snow. I mean, you got everything possible, desert scenes. Like, you really are dealing with a ton of different looks. So talk to me about kind of your approach to the film, lighting-wise.
Again, I take a lot of my cues from the story. So for instance, when Mulan is in her Talo at home, which is her village with her family, we wanted to be quite colourful and homey and safe and warm environment. So a lot of the lighting it feels like that, and it's soft and it should be beautiful. So you want to feel the connection and the love, basically. So that was my cue for that part of the story. And then when she goes into the emperor's throne room, it's got to be opulent and golden and glowing. So that was my cue for that. And then the battle sequences have got to be, especially the big battle, was harsh and desaturated a little. And so we found landscape that was that. And the lighting was quite white and not so warm and colourful. So the lighting was very bland. And then there were certain moments, in the for instance, in the yurt when Bori Khan is talking with his the northern invaders that wanted to be sort of quite scary and dark and moody, and so I took that approach and used the fire, and then we designed like a chimney, a hole in the yurt, which is a tent, so that it would be a single shaft of light coming down, and it'd be all top lit and a little bit scary and things like that. But technically, can I tell you one thing that I did? Because I knew this was a big movie with big sets, a lot of sets. We had a huge schedule it was quite tight for even a big movie. I think we shot 74 days. So what I did was, for instance, in the bigger sets, I would set up the lighting for 360 degrees. So I would have all my lighting fixtures. I used a lot of LEDs, and they would be on a dimmer board, and they could change colour, and they could dim, and they could also be raised up and down so that the angle could change. So instead of just being at the top, they could come, my image is back to front, they could come down and be on the side. So
do you have a mirrored image right now, or backwards image?
Which is concerning. So I was prepared for anything. And so when we would turn the camera around on a huge set, I would be able to turn the lighting around in the same time. So say 15 minutes, 20 minutes, boom, on a set that was 300 foot long, I was relit. And I also tried very consciously to keep most of the lighting off the floor so that it would be up in the lighting grid and be able to be lowered down, or, for close-ups, sure, I brought lights in, but Most of it happened off, and that is also about just giving the actors the floor. And when we rehearse, or say they need to move around, or they decide, Nikki decides we're going to look over here. All of a sudden, I don't have a whole lot of gear everywhere. So with that approach, and it took a lot of planning, I found it worked really well. And the same with when we were doing our exteriors. I had these big lighting, we called them spines, and they were on construction cranes, and they were a series of boxes, lighting LED boxes, 8 foot by 8 foot, with different amounts of, I think they had 8 fixtures in them. And I could turn them on, or I could spin them round and do it pretty quickly to light a huge set. But I was always very conscious too that, you can do that, yes, but it still had to look beautiful. And I wanted the film to look beautiful. And even in there was beauty in the desaturated geothermal places where they were shooting, but it still gave you the emotion of the scene. So that's how I approached it. And again, it took planning, but I was really happy with it. And the same with, even when we were in the smaller sets, I would just make sure I was lit for 360 degrees. So even though we planned a lot of stuff, if we were going to change anything for any reason, I was ready for it, and people didn't wait for me. And so in that sense also, for such a big movie, I really made the most of my pre-production and planning, and just was very organised.
So you're lighting for 360, but does that sort of limit you to mostly top light in that situation?
No, it was, again, I could lower my lights down.
Okay. So they were mounted 360, but you had control so you can bring it down from the ceiling.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, drop them down.
That's kind of cool, because I've definitely talked to other DPs that, they may have used this technique and I just wasn't picking up on it, but I've talked to a lot of DPs that have lights on, controllers. They've got the dimmers and the programming, but for the brightness, for the color, not necessarily for the positioning. So this is kind of an interesting point that I really haven't heard much on the show.
And even in like a small set, we always had lights ready to come down through the window, or, I'd always have top lights that I could vary whether they were on a little bit or a lot, or just in a certain part of the set. And then, like I was saying, for some sequences, or, definitely close-ups, I'd bring something in into the closer to the actors from the floor. But for most part, and a lot of the big sequences, especially when, we're dealing with an army, there's a lot of sequences in the garrison at night that was lit by fire. And I just set up a long line of lamps that could come down and be on, and then when we turn around, the other side would come down and be on. And, we could shoot without a lot of, things would be moving. When we're moving the camera, we would all be moving. Stuff would be happening, but it was very, organised and planned.
What are the benefits to lighting 360? If you're talking to other cinematographers right now thinking about how they're going to approach their next film, what would you say are the benefits to it?
Time. Like I was saying, being able to let the actors and the director have freedom, so that I wouldn't have pre-lit a certain set that we'd walk in and things change and I'm not ready for it because I've just done one thing. And so I like to be able to, because things change, you can be meticulously planned, but for various reasons things change, and all of a sudden you're shooting in a different room in a house, or you're not shooting in that direction, you're shooting in that direction. And I like to be able to change very quickly if things change.
We got a question from Twitter here, Chasing Photography. In your ASC article about the production of Mulan, you talk about the remote grading process. The question is, was that a game changer, and do you see that becoming the norm? So can you just first explain to us what this remote grading process is, and then, answer that question?
I have a DIT on my set, and I would set up a LUT beforehand that we're all working to, all the cameras. But I now as I've been shooting more and more films, I have a very simple LUT that I design at the beginning of the show, which is a lookup table where it's a base grade that we're working to on set. And even now I'm doing less and less in the LUT. I do, worked with a basic ARRI LUT called K1S1, which is a little bit less saturated colour and a little bit lower contrast than Rec 709. And then we just, in our testing, we decided that we would bump up the reds a little bit because red was a very important colour in the movie. As you know, Mulan's costume's red. And then I would be on set and, for instance, in a night shoot or in some of the interiors, if I felt like it wasn't looking warm enough or contrast enough, I would wind that in a CDL on set, and then that would go to dailies, and the dailies would be coming back with that baked in. And then by the time I got to the DI, I used that as a guide for grading the film. But I don't do a lot of grading on set. I try and make it so that one thing I do is I make sure that I have enough information, and I sort of treat digital like I used to shoot film, which is I keep the shadows open a little bit so that if later on, for instance, someone's wearing something black like I am and we want to see detail, because especially on Mulan, we had very intricate fabric and leather work and amazingly beautiful details that I don't want to lose those. So if I want to later on bring that out, I have the information there. So even if I'm bringing the CDL down to make it darker, for instance, in that yurt scene, I had that CDL open. I mean, the exposure was open like a stop brighter than you see on the screen. And that I brought the exposure down on set so that it looked the way we wanted to, but knowing that, say, we could isolate this black part of their costume or whatever, that we would be able to bring that out on its own. So I never wanted to get in a place where we're stuck and it's too dark, because you can always make things darker in the DI, but to make things brighter, if there's no information there, you can't do that. And as long as you can only do it to a certain extent. But as long as I'm protecting my highlights and they're not burning out, that was my approach.
In our last couple of minutes, I'd love to get your opinion on, or your thoughts on, the most challenging lighting setup in the film. If you can let us know, what was your most challenging lighting setup and how you overcame that challenge?
I think it was the garrison at night. It was like a huge location. And what I didn't want to do was have a great big fake moonlight going on, didn't. And I also thought they wouldn't be functioning that light anyway. So made sure that because they had braziers and torches for firelight that was sort of sprinkled around, and I made sure that was my source of light my reference for the source of light. And so to be able to create a big firelight source, and I did have a little bit of moonlight. What we did was to get depth and contrast of colour in the scene, so it wouldn't just be orange and black. I had them. It was an exterior set at night. I had them have like an atmosphere and a mist, like a smoke that was coming from braziers or anywhere, that was consistently through the whole set. And then what I did was I just glowed the moonlight into the mist. So the top of it was glowing. So the actual atmosphere was bluey green, cyan colour. And you'd feel it in the reflection on the armour, but they were mainly lit with orange firelight colour. So to do that on a big scale, I think, was the most challenging, and to keep it consistent. But, we worked out a way to do it, and I'm pretty happy.
Well, the film, it really looks great. The cinematography in this is awesome. And if anybody listening out there is like, oh, it's a Disney movie, this is very different. This is not the typical Disney movie, and certainly not the typical remake of a cartoon. Like it stands on its own as its own film, and it really is just excellently done. So you did a really good job on this, Mandy. You and the whole team, I'm sure.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's a great collaboration. And you know what? It's just very satisfying to have a director that can get the right people around that are on the same page, because we all were. And I think that's why I'm really proud of how the whole, the whole visual language of the movie works with costume and art direction and myself and makeup and, the post people, the visual effects, that Nikki made sure that we were all a team, and all on working to the same goal.
Yep. And my last question, production during COVID-19. Are you shooting right now, or how have things changed for you?
Well, I'm on Baz Luhrmann's Elvis film, and
I know. I saw that on IMDb, and I'm like, oh my God, she's shooting that. What a great film that. I mean,
yeah,
that's great. You must be very excited.
I'm very excited. But we shut down in March when everybody else shut down. I think we were one of the last films in the world because we're shooting in Australia and the virus is not very prevalent here. And we've just got back to work a week ago. So we're back into pre-production, hoping to shoot very soon. And all our actors are coming back in and they're all having to go into quarantine. And and a lot of my crew are quarantining right now, and they get let out onto the rooftop of the hotel and they leave little messages for each other. And they were telling me, which is kind of cute. But so fingers crossed, we're full steam ahead right now, which is great, and it's exciting to be back. And because everybody's been affected by this, so it's and not a lot of productions have been able to get back, so we're lucky.
Do you have to change anything, or is the idea that after the 2-week quarantine, you can do everything as you were before on camera? I mean, I'm not talking about production. I'm talking about like the script. Does anything have to change now to abide by COVID restrictions?
It's more about our on-set protocol. We all have to be tested twice a week, wear masks, PPE, and protecting the actors basically is what we're doing. Because I think I know some films are deciding to do a lot of CGI work to distance people or working in a volume. We're not doing anything like that. We're doing our due diligence, and we have a very strict protocol on set and coming onto the lot. You're not even allowed on the lot if you haven't been tested 2 days before, and then we get tested twice a week and our temperature every day. And, like I said, there aren't very many cases in Queensland. It's very, very small amount. So we're I think we're in a pretty safe position.
Are you guys adopting that zone system that was in the white paper?
Yes, we are. Yeah. But I've worked on a couple of commercials here before we came back, and we were doing that. And after a day or so, it pretty much clicks in and becomes just part of the process. And I didn't see it as a problem at all.
Yeah, I'm getting that too from most people that I talk to. There's sort of, I wouldn't say people are liking it, but people are finding that it's not as prohibitive as they were fearing.
Yeah. And it just means, you're just a bit more strict with who's on set when, giving people their time without everybody kind of jumping in and all doing things at once. It's a bit more disciplined.
Yeah. Well, I mean, creative people are creative. That's what you guys do. So, you're problem solvers, and this is just another problem to solve. So.
Exactly.
Well, I'm so glad you're doing well, you're healthy, and on a really great film with that Elvis project. That's going to be a lot of fun. So please come back.
Yes, anytime.
Talk to us about that.
Thank you so much. No, my pleasure.
Do.
I will.
But for now, if you want to celebrate Mandy's work, Mulan on Disney Plus, and hopefully in theaters in other parts of the world that don't have Disney Plus, and definitely go see it. You guys are absolutely going to love it. It's a really great film. The cinematography is amazing, and now we know how they shot it. So thank you, Mandy, so much for being on Go Creative Show.
Thank you very much, Ben. My pleasure.
All right, I want to thank Mandy Walker, ASC ACS, the Director of Photography of Mulan, and so much more. Of course, we're going to put a link to all of her stuff in the show notes so you guys can celebrate her entire catalog, and she's got a lot there to celebrate, that's for sure. And I also want to thank Matt Russell for mixing and mastering and making the show sound so good. You can find him at gainstructure.com. And our producer, Connor Crosby. He puts it all together behind the scenes, and without him, this show really would not happen. So you guys please follow him at ignitionvisuals.com and on Twitter at ignitionvisuals. And while you're on Twitter, you can follow me, Ben Consoli. In fact, follow me on Instagram. I don't do so much on Twitter, honestly. Instagram is really where I post all my stuff. So if you love behind the scenes, and I know you do, I'm always posting about what I'm doing on my in-person shoots and my virtual shoots too. I've been posting a lot about that, and people seem very interested in that. So follow me on Instagram. But really the most important thing is to follow Go Creative Show. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. Without you people, we wouldn't be able to do this show. And you've been so supportive, especially in the past few months. We really, really appreciate it. So listen and share and continue doing what you're doing. You guys are an amazing audience, and I really, I don't thank you enough. And sincerely, you have kind of kept us going these past few months. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And of course, I want to thank our sponsors, MZ Education for Creatives and PostLab, stress-free collaboration in Final Cut Pro. Without those guys, the show simply wouldn't exist. So please, if you love us, please love them too. Support those guys, and we'll be able to keep bringing you new episodes every single week here on Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers.